Your life isn't random. It was scripted before you were even born. The people you've met, the heartbreaks you've endured, the strange coincidences that felt like more than chance, they were never accidents. You've been walking a path your soul laid out long before you took your first breath. That's the truth hidden in plain sight. Long before this life began, you were somewhere else, somewhere timeless, crafting the blueprint of this exact incarnation with precision and purpose. Every joy, every betrayal, every moment of bliss or despair was part of the curriculum you chose. And not because you enjoy pain, but because you understood that evolution requires experience. Growth demands contrast. You knew you wouldn't remember, and still you said yes. But most people never wake up to it. They move through life on autopilot, unaware of the deeper architecture behind the chaos. That ends here. You didn't stumble into this life by chance. You designed it, and it's time to remember why. Most people go through life believing they're making their own choices. They think free will means their decisions are theirs alone, that their pain is unfair, their success random, and the people who come and go are simply fate playing dice. But what if the truth is far more intentional? What if your soul agreed to all of it before you even took your first breath? Soul contracts aren't a new idea. They've echoed through mystic traditions across time, from Hermetic teachings to Vedic philosophy, Gnostic gospels to shamanic visions. And yet, they've been diluted by pop spirituality or dismissed entirely by modern minds too distracted to notice the design beneath their chaos. But once you start seeing the patterns, once you really pay attention, you'll realize something unsettling. Your life has never been random. It's been orchestrated. A soul contract is a metaphysical agreement made outside of time, between souls. It's not written in ink, but energy. It's not forced, but chosen. Before you incarnated into this lifetime, your soul met with others you're now encountering. You chose parents, not because they were perfect, but because they would trigger what needed to awaken in you. You chose lovers, friends, and even enemies, not for comfort, but for challenge, transformation, and karmic completion. These aren't ideas meant to pacify pain. They're truths meant to liberate you from it. Because when you realize there's meaning behind your struggle, the struggle no longer owns you. Not all soul contracts are dramatic or traumatic. Some are soft and supportive. You may have crossed paths with someone who felt familiar the moment they looked at you, or had a conversation that somehow unlocked a new version of yourself. That's a contract fulfilling its role, right on schedule. Others are more complex. The people who hurt you the most, who abandoned you, betrayed you, maybe even abused you, they may have been playing roles you agreed to in the name of growth. That's hard to swallow. But the soul doesn't seek comfort. It seeks evolution. And growth doesn't come from silence and safety. It comes from friction. It comes from being broken and rebuilding stronger, clearer, wiser. Those moments you wished never happened. They were written into the script for the very reason they shook you. But this doesn't mean your life is predestined or robotic. Soul contracts aren't cages. They're frameworks. They're the context, not the conclusion. You still have a choice. You still shape your path. But the events, people, and core challenges, those may have already been agreed upon. How you respond to them is the wild card. That's where free will breathes inside fate. Some of what we've uncovered about soul contracts is too controversial for YouTube. We share it all in our free newsletter, Insights Academy, including a free copy of the Kybalion, links in the description. Understanding your soul contract changes how you see everything. That heartbreak that shattered you, it wasn't random. That illness that brought your world to a halt, it didn't just happen. That chance encounter that pulled your life in a new direction, none of it is meaningless. The blueprint is intricate, elegant, and deeply personal. When your soul drafted it, it included moments of failure, loss, disconnection, and rebirth, not to punish you, but to push you, to remind you of who you are beneath the layers of illusion and conditioning. And the beauty of soul contracts is that they don't bind you forever. They evolve as you evolve. Some are lifelong. Others complete once the lesson is integrated. Some need to be renegotiated through inner work, healing, and conscious intent. But it all begins with awareness, seeing the invisible design behind your visible life. Because once you realize your life was chosen, your pain reframed, and your growth preordained, you can finally stop asking, "Why me?" and start asking, "What now?" There's a reason the same patterns keep repeating in your life. The same type of relationship, the same self-doubt, the same moment where everything seems to fall apart just as it's coming together. It's not because you're cursed, it's not because you're unlucky, and it's definitely not because the universe has it out for you. It's because your soul is trying to finish what it started. Until the lesson is learned, the test will keep showing up, over and over again, dressed in new names, new faces, and new circumstances, but carrying the same core message. Karma is not punishment. That's one of the most damaging misunderstandings passed around spiritual circles and weaponized by ego-driven thinking. Karma is correction. It's the universe recalibrating, bringing things back into balance, not because you did something bad, but because you are here to grow into something deeper. In truth, karma is compassion. It gives you another chance to respond differently. And soul contracts often carry this karma from one life into another, not as chains, but as agreements. Agreements to complete something left undone. To meet again, but this time love instead of betray. To speak instead of stay silent. To rise instead of retreat. The idea that we reincarnate isn't new. It's woven into ancient philosophies from Egypt to India, from the Tibetan Book of the Dead to the mystery schools of the West. The body dies, but the soul doesn't. It carries imprints, memories, patterns, unresolved emotions, from one life to the next, like echoes rippling through time. These aren't always conscious memories, but you feel them in your bones. That inexplicable fear of abandonment, that strange pull towards certain people or places, that instinct to push away love before it gets too close. These may be past life wounds bleeding into the present timeline, asking to be healed. But healing doesn't happen by avoiding the pain. It happens by meeting it head-on, not as a victim, but as the soul behind the curtain. When you stop asking, "Why does this keep happening to me?" and start asking, "What is my soul trying to complete?" that's when the shift begins. That's when karma transforms from cycle to catalyst. And that's where soul contracts become clear. Many of us are living lives that feel unfamiliar to our spirit, but eerily familiar in our suffering. It's like walking through a dream you've seen before but can't quite remember. That's karmic repetition. But it's also a doorway. Your patterns are the breadcrumb trail. Your triggers are the signposts. The people who provoke your deepest anger, fear, or sorrow are often the ones who've walked with your soul before. And not to destroy you, but to mirror the part of you that's still unresolved. When you avoid these patterns, you delay your evolution. But when you face them, you break the loop. There's a kind of liberation that only comes when you realize nothing you're going through is random. That the hardest experiences might actually be the most important. That your recurring pain points aren't just bad luck, they're your curriculum. They are the soul's chosen path of refinement. And while the ego hates repetition, the soul understands mastery. You don't graduate a lesson you refuse to learn. And the most powerful spiritual breakthroughs often come wrapped in the most familiar suffering. The moment you start seeing your life as a spiritual school rather than a series of unfortunate events, something inside you unlocks. You stop being the student who resents the test, and you become the seeker who wants to understand the deeper message. Soul contracts aren't easy, but they're precise. They put the right people in your path, at the right time, with the right frequency of friction to ignite your next phase. Some come to open your heart. Others come to break it, so you can rebuild it with wisdom. Either way, the agreement was made, not to punish you, but to push you into your potential. And here's the key. Karma isn't your enemy. It's your echo. And once the message is received, the pattern no longer needs to repeat. Because the loop doesn't end when the pain stops. It ends when the lesson is integrated. That's when the contract completes. That's when the soul is free. Imagine, before this life began, your soul stood in a place beyond time. Not heaven, not earth. Something else. A dimension of pure awareness, where the noise of the world had no weight and your truest self could be heard without interference. In that place, you weren't confused, scared, or unsure. You were awake, clear, unbound, and you knew what your next step had to be. To return to the physical world and finish what was left undone. That's where soul contracts begin. In this non-physical space, what some call the spirit realm, the astral plane, or the in-between, souls prepare for their next incarnation. It's not done lightly. It's a deep, deliberate process. You didn't randomly end up with your parents, your city, your body, or even your challenges. You chose them, not with your human logic, but with spiritual clarity. You reviewed past lifetimes. You reflected on patterns not yet healed. And then, with help from your guides, your higher self, and a council of souls wiser than you could imagine, you began to design the life you're living right now. And you didn't do it alone. The people in your life, the ones who love you, and the ones who break you, many of them were there too. You met with them. You made agreements. You said things like, "In this life, I need to learn how to forgive betrayal. Will you play that role for me?" And they said yes, not because they hate you, but because they love you enough to play the villain in your story, if it means your soul will awaken. That's how sacred and complex these contracts are. They go beyond our human definitions of good and evil. They're acts of soul-level commitment. You chose your family, even if it was dysfunctional. You chose your body, even if it carries pain. You chose certain circumstances, poverty, illness, limitation, not because you wanted to suffer, but because your soul saw the growth hidden in the struggle. These aren't punishments. They're the soil for expansion. And your soul knew that without pressure, the diamond would never form. Some people hear this and feel resistance. Why would anyone choose hardship? Why would a soul plan trauma, grief, or abandonment? But that question only makes sense from the lens of the ego. The soul doesn't seek comfort, it seeks clarity. It wants to remember itself, and often that remembering comes through contrast. A soul that has never known darkness cannot understand its own light. That's why the soul chooses depth, intensity, transformation. It knows that awakening doesn't happen in the shallow end of life. It happens when everything familiar breaks apart, and you're forced to remember who you really are. Even those strange, brief encounters you've had, people who entered your life for a week, a season, or a single moment, may have been fulfilling contracts. That stranger who said exactly what you needed to hear. That friend who walked away just when you were about to fall apart, so you'd learn to stand alone. These aren't coincidences, they're codes, woven into your timeline with intention and purpose. Sometimes the most powerful contracts are the shortest ones. But none of this removes your responsibility. Soul contracts aren't excuses. They don't absolve you of accountability. They simply give you context. They remind you that even the mess had meaning, that the chaos wasn't chaos, that the storm was scheduled. And in that recognition, you reclaim power. You stop blaming fate or others or yourself, and instead start asking deeper questions. What was I meant to learn here? How can I honor this pain instead of run from it? What would it mean to trust that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be? Because when you look at your life through the lens of pre-birth planning, you stop seeing yourself as a victim of randomness. You see design, you see structure, you see soul. And that shift in perception, that's when your contract starts to come alive. There's a reason your deepest wounds cut so precisely, why some experiences seemed custom-built to break you, why the pain wasn't vague, but specific, designed like a puzzle piece that fit perfectly into the cracks of who you thought you were. That's because it was never random. Your soul didn't just stumble into suffering, it signed off on it, not as punishment, not as cruelty, but as a transformation. Because some awakenings can only be born from pain. This is where most people turn away. They hear the words, "You chose this," and feel only anger. How could I have chosen heartbreak? How could I have agreed to lose someone I loved? To be abandoned, rejected, hurt, humiliated. What kind of soul would invite trauma into its path? And yet, that question only makes sense when we forget what the soul values most. Not comfort, but evolution. Not safety, but truth. Not predictability, but depth. There are certain lessons that can't be taught through theory. You can't read your way into resilience. You can't meditate your way into unconditional love without having tasted the opposite. And you can't expand into your higher self if you've never been pulled down into your lowest. That's the paradox of soul contracts. The pain wasn't placed there to destroy you. It was placed there to strip away what isn't you, to break the mask, to shatter the illusion, to push you so hard that you'd finally stop pretending and start remembering. Every soul comes here with blinders. That's the condition of incarnation. You forget who you are so you can rediscover it through experience. And the more powerful your mission, the heavier the amnesia. The more light you came to bring, the more darkness you may have had to walk through to access it. That's not a weakness. That's design. Your pain is not a flaw in the system. It is the system. Some of the people who hurt you most were fulfilling their end of a sacred, if painful, agreement. They might never remember it. You might never speak again. But, on a soul level, they played the part you asked them to. And this doesn't mean you excuse their actions. It doesn't mean you bypass accountability or boundaries. It means you no longer carry the pain as something meaningless. You no longer see yourself as broken. You see yourself as forged. The spiritual path is not about escaping suffering. It's about meeting it with open eyes and asking, what is this here to teach me? That question alone can turn the tide. Because when you're no longer fighting your pain, you're free to understand it. And in that understanding, the contract begins to complete. Not because you fixed something, but because you saw it clearly. Think back to your most difficult moment, the one that changed everything. The day everything fell apart. The betrayal, the diagnosis, the loss. Now ask yourself, who were you before that? And who did you become after? Maybe it broke you open. Maybe it awakened something you never would have found otherwise. Maybe that darkness turned into the doorway your soul had been waiting for. Because that's often what pain is, a disguised initiation, a sacred dismantling, not meant to end you, but to reveal you. In soul contracts, pain is not chaos, it's curriculum. And the deeper the pain, the deeper the lesson. Some souls even volunteer for the hardest paths, not because they enjoy suffering, but because they know what comes after. They know what strength is forged through endurance, what compassion is born through heartbreak, what purpose emerges through collapse. These are the souls who don't just want to live, they want to evolve, and so they choose the fire. Not to burn, but to rise. When you can look back at your life and say, that broke me, but it also built me, you're seeing through the lens of the soul. You're no longer stuck in the story of the wound. You're in the wisdom. You've stepped out of the victim narrative and into the sacred agreement behind it. And that shift, that's where real healing begins. If your soul planned your life before you were born, if it chose your family, your challenges, your heartbreaks, then what does that say about free will? Are you just following a cosmic script, walking through life with the illusion of choice? Is everything already written, or do you actually get to decide who you become? This is the paradox at the heart of soul contracts, and it's one that requires a deeper lens to truly understand. The truth is, both are real. You are living a life that was mapped out long before you arrived, and at the same time, you are making it up as you go. Think of your soul contract not as a rigid plan, but as a blueprint. It sketches out key themes, relationships, encounters, and experiences. But how you move through them, how you respond, evolve, resist, or embrace, that's all up to you. Fate lays out the playing field. Free will decides how you move across it. This is why two people can face the same experience and walk away completely different. One collapses, one rises. One repeats the same mistake for years. The other learns, grows, and never looks back. The contract brought the challenge, but the response was free. That's your power. The soul gives you the structure. The human gives it shape. Some events in life feel inevitable, like a force pulled you into a particular relationship, job, or decision without explanation. These are often contract points, turning moments where your soul's plan is in motion. But just because something was meant to happen doesn't mean your reaction to it is predetermined. You can meet the love of your life and still sabotage it. You can be handed a spiritual awakening and still choose to go back to sleep. Contracts are possibilities, not guarantees. You might wonder then, can soul contracts be changed? The answer is yes. Not all contracts are lifelong. Some complete once a lesson is learned. Others become outdated as you evolve. And some are rewritten entirely, consciously or unconsciously, through major internal transformation. When you step into a new level of awareness, old agreements that no longer match your vibration naturally dissolve. That toxic relationship that used to have a magnetic hold over you, suddenly, it no longer fits. That job that once felt like destiny, now it feels like a cage. That's not failure, that's growth. And growth rewrites everything. There's a quiet kind of courage in owning your part in the unfolding. In saying, maybe I agreed to this, but I also get to choose how I live it. Because that's where sovereignty begins, not in controlling the external world, but in mastering your inner one. Soul contracts were never meant to remove your freedom. They were designed to offer you purpose, to remind you that your life isn't a series of disconnected accidents. It's a narrative, a myth, a carefully constructed arc written by a soul who loves you enough to give you both challenge and choice. There's power in this paradox. When you stop waiting for fate to save you, or for the universe to hand you permission, you begin to move differently. You stop asking, what's meant for me? And start asking, what am I choosing today? You stop fearing mistakes and start trusting that every step, even the missteps, are part of the unfolding. You stop being a passive recipient of your life and instead become its co-creator. Free will doesn't contradict soul contracts. It fulfills them. Because every time you choose love over fear, growth over comfort, truth over convenience, you activate what the contract was always meant to unlock: your remembrance, your alignment, your liberation. And that's the irony most miss. The more you understand the structure of your soul's design, the more freedom you actually gain. Awareness creates space. Clarity creates choice. Knowing your contract doesn't limit you. It reminds you that you were never here by accident, and that how you show up in each moment is still entirely up to you. Sometimes you just know. You meet someone and feel like you've known them for lifetimes. You walk into a place you've never been and it feels oddly familiar. A series of coincidences unfold so perfectly timed that it's hard to explain them away. These aren't just strange moments or quirks of chance. These are signs, echoes, glimpses of the script your soul agreed to long before you got here. And if you pay attention, they can reveal whether you're truly living out the contract you came here to fulfill, or whether you've drifted off course. Soul contracts aren't always loud. They rarely show up with flashing lights or obvious markers. More often, they reveal themselves through a subtle sense of resonance. Something clicks. Something in you softens, or stirs, or rises up and says, yes, this is it. It might be a relationship, a job, a location, a piece of art, or even a random encounter. It may not look impressive to anyone else, but something in your bones recognizes it. Synchronicities are a major signpost. When life starts aligning in ways that defy logic, it's often your soul confirming that you're on the right path. Numbers repeating, people mentioning the same book or idea within hours of each other, dreams that mirror real life. These aren't just coincidences, they're communication. The universe has a way of nudging you, not through shouting, but through patterns. These moments are like cosmic breadcrumbs, guiding you toward the next piece of your contract. Another sign is resistance. Not all confirmation comes wrapped in ease. Sometimes, living your soul contract feels like walking into a storm, because transformation often demands discomfort. If something keeps showing up, no matter how much you try to avoid it, there's usually a reason. that issue you can't seem to escape, that lesson that keeps circling back, that calling you try to ignore but can't. That's your contract whispering, louder each time. You might also feel it through inner callings that won't leave you alone. An urge to write, to travel, to speak truth, to leave something behind and start again, even if it makes no sense, even if it scares you, especially if it scares you. These callings are rarely random. They often mark a pivotal contract moment, a point where your soul is trying to steer the wheel through your intuition. Then there are karmic relationships, those magnetic, often intense connections that feel fated from the start. You meet, and it's like time folds in on itself. There's a charge, a pull, a feeling that something significant is happening. These relationships often carry unfinished business from past lives, and they tend to trigger deep growth or deep unraveling. They're not always meant to last, but they are always meant to teach. And sometimes you feel like you're being tested. Everything feels heavy, stagnant, nothing works. That too can be part of the contract, because before a soul steps into the next phase, there is often a period of resistance. The soul wants to know, will you choose alignment, even when it's hard? Will you walk your path, even when it's unclear? Will you trust the pull, even when the plan doesn't make sense? Signs don't always show up as confirmation. Sometimes they show up as challenges that force you to grow into who you agreed to become. But here's the real key. Alignment feels honest. It doesn't mean your life is perfect, but it feels purposeful. It feels lived, not performed. You're no longer trying to force things to happen, they unfold. You're no longer trying to prove yourself. You're simply expressing yourself. You feel less like you're chasing something and more like you're remembering something. When you're living out your soul contract, there's a sense of peace, even in the chaos. A kind of knowing that you're exactly where you need to be. You're not always certain, but you're clear. You may not know the whole path, but you know the next step. And that's all the soul ever asks of you, to listen, to follow, and to honor what you already chose. Just because your soul made a plan before you were born doesn't mean you're bound to it forever. Soul contracts are not life sentences. They are agreements, living, dynamic, evolving. And like all agreements, they can be rewritten. You are not here to be trapped by your spiritual history. You are here to work with it, learn from it, and ultimately transcend what no longer serves your highest evolution. Many people carry contracts that were never meant to last a lifetime. Some were forged in past lives, based on unresolved wounds or unhealed dynamics. Others were set in place before this life began, intended to guide your early development or offer a specific experience of contrast. But the soul is not rigid. It adapts as you do. And if you've outgrown an agreement, if you've learned the lesson, completed the karmic cycle, or risen into a new vibration, it is entirely within your power to release it. This is where spiritual responsibility meets spiritual freedom. Because while your soul may have chosen certain experiences, you are the one living them now. And your consciousness is the most powerful force in the universe. With awareness, you can shift timelines. With intention, you can dissolve bonds. With love, you can complete the contracts that no longer align with who you've become. But change doesn't happen through avoidance. You can't run from a contract and expect it to disappear. You have to face it, understand it, thank it, complete it. That's the deeper work. And sometimes, it's not about cutting a tie. It's about finally learning what the experience came to teach you. Once you truly integrate the lesson, the contract begins to loosen. The need for that person, pattern, or pain point naturally falls away. There are also times when you have to make the conscious decision to break a soul agreement. Maybe you made a vow in a past life, poverty, celibacy, martyrdom, that no longer fits your current path. Or maybe you're in a relationship that once felt destined but now only drains your spirit. These are moments of truth. Your soul is asking you to choose again, and not out of rebellion, but out of evolution. This kind of transformation requires deep inner work, meditation, shadow work, cord cutting, inner child healing, speaking truth you've buried for years, letting go of guilt that was never yours to carry. These aren't rituals of escape, they are rites of passage. They mark the point where you stop living by an old script and begin writing your own. And you don't need permission to do this. Not from a guru, not from a healer, not from your past. The authority lies within you. The moment you decide that an old agreement no longer fits, the universe begins to respond. Energy shifts. People move. New opportunities unfold. Because your reality is a reflection of your resonance. And when your frequency changes, your contracts do too. Some of the most powerful growth you'll ever experience will come from breaking agreements that were made when you didn't know any better. Agreements to stay small, to stay silent, to carry pain that wasn't yours, to be loyal to stories that no longer match your soul. You are allowed to outgrow what you once accepted. You are allowed to walk away from what you once called destiny. That isn't failure, it's maturity. And maturity is a deeply spiritual act. Even karmic relationships can be released with grace. You don't have to stay in cycles just because they feel familiar. You don't have to keep playing the same role in someone else's story. When you forgive, not just the other person, but yourself, you begin to close the loop. You begin to dissolve the glue that held the contract in place. And what was once a source of pain becomes a portal of peace. Soul contracts were never meant to be chains. They were meant to be guides, temporary signposts, chapters, not the whole book. You are the author now. You always have been. And if a contract no longer honors your expansion, you can close it, not with bitterness, but with gratitude. Not in rebellion, but in reverence. Because you're not erasing the past. You're honoring what it gave you, and choosing, from this point forward, to walk freely into the next chapter of your soul's unfolding. There's a moment in every spiritual journey when something clicks, not in the mind, but somewhere deeper. It's not a thought, it's a knowing. You look back at your life, not just the highlights, but the heartbreaks, the chaos, the betrayals, and suddenly it all starts to make sense. Not in a way that justifies the pain, but in a way that gives it context. The losses weren't punishments. The breakdowns weren't failures. The delays weren't detours. They were coordinates, precise and deliberate, guiding you back to yourself. When you begin to live through the lens of soul contracts, the world shifts beneath your feet. You no longer see life as a series of random, disconnected events. You see design. You see rhythm. You see echoes of agreements you once made in places you'd never expect. The teacher who humiliated you in front of the class. The friend who walked away when you needed them most. The illness that brought your whole world to a halt. These weren't just painful memories. They were doorways. You just didn't realize it at the time. Because clarity usually comes later. After the dust settles. After the grief softens. After you've screamed at the sky asking, "Why me?" Enough times to finally ask, "What was this for?" That's when the contract starts to speak. That's when the patterns begin to reveal themselves. And what once felt like senseless chaos becomes sacred architecture. Not because it was painless, but because it had purpose. Soul contracts don't make life easier. They make it meaningful. They allow you to meet your past not with regret, but with reverence. They invite you to stop resenting the people who hurt you and start recognizing the role they played in your awakening. That doesn't mean excusing harm. It doesn't mean abandoning boundaries. It means releasing the grip of victimhood and stepping into the power of perspective. Because when you understand the agreement behind the experience, you stop carrying it as a wound. You carry it as wisdom. And with that wisdom, you start to live differently. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is this asking of me?" You stop chasing the next big moment and start honoring the one you're in. You no longer see yourself as a character being written. You see yourself as the author remembering the plot. Even forgiveness takes on a new shape. It's no longer about forgetting or moving on. It's about understanding that on some level, your soul called in that experience for a reason. Forgiveness becomes the act of closing the loop, completing the contract, and freeing yourself from the emotional residue that keeps you tethered to the past. And here's the most liberating part. You realize you're not behind. You're not late. You didn't mess it up. Every moment brought you here. Every breakdown shaped your breakthrough. Every detour taught you something your soul needed to remember. And now, with that understanding, you can move forward not with fear, but with trust. If you're not subscribed to Insights Academy, you're missing out on weekly guidance we can't post here, including your free copy of the Kybalion. Don't wait. Get the link below. This is the invitation of soul contracts, not to bypass pain, but to elevate your perspective, to live not as a victim of life, but as a conscious participant in its unfolding, to see yourself not as a mistake, but as a masterpiece in progress. Your life has always been speaking to you, through every failure, every connection, every unexpected turn. It's all been a conversation between your human self and your soul, asking one question: are you ready to remember why you came? Because when you do, everything changes. Not because the world outside is different, but because the one seeing it finally is. You didn't come here by accident. You didn't fall into this life, this body, these circumstances. You chose it. And now, knowing that, truly knowing that, it's time to make a deeper choice. Not just to exist, but to live intentionally, to walk with your eyes open, to stop asking for permission and start remembering your power. Because everything you've been through has been pointing you toward this moment. The moment you finally remember who you are beneath the story, beneath the wounds, beneath the noise. You are not a passive participant in someone else's design. You are the author, the architect, the soul behind the scenes. You chose your lessons, your joys, your pain, and now you get to choose your path forward. Awareness doesn't just give you insight, it gives you access. Access to healing, to release, to rewriting the story from this point on. You don't have to be perfect. You don't need every answer. You just need to be willing to live awake. And this is where the real power lies. When you begin to see your life through the lens of soul contracts, you stop seeing everything as a battle to win or a problem to fix. You begin to approach challenges with curiosity instead of resistance. You stop asking, "How do I avoid this?" and begin asking, "What is this here to teach me?" That one shift changes everything, because once you see the lesson, you're no longer stuck in the loop. You're free to move through it with grace. Living consciously doesn't mean you'll never feel lost again. It means that even when you do, you know it's part of the journey. You trust the detour. You make peace with the unknown. You stop fighting the path your soul chose and start walking it with integrity. And in doing so, you begin to notice a quiet shift. Life stops happening to you and starts happening through you. That's the contract fulfilling itself, not as obligation, but as purpose. You'll still have moments of doubt. You'll still feel fear, but they won't control you, because now you have context. You know that even the fear has a place. It's not the enemy. It's an old part of you asking to be seen before it's released. And you'll meet it, not with shame, but with compassion. That's what it means to walk your path consciously, to live your contract not as a burden, but as a sacred roadmap. The beauty of this path is that it doesn't end with you. The more aligned you become, the more others feel permission to do the same. Your clarity becomes contagious. Your healing opens the door for someone else to begin theirs. And without even trying, you start to fulfill one of the most profound contracts of all, to be a living reminder to others of their own power. There's no final destination here, no certificate of completion. Just a life lived with depth, with presence, with soul. That's what you came for. Not to avoid pain, not to stay comfortable, but to remember who you are. Through every experience your soul carefully chose to bring you back to yourself. The real question now isn't, what did I agree to before I was born? It's, what am I agreeing to now? Will you continue to react from the past, or respond from awareness? Will you keep living by default, or start living by design? You don't need another sign. This is it. The moment you begin to honor your life as sacred, even the hard parts, is the moment you begin to live your soul contract in its highest form. That's not just spiritual, that's transformational. If this video resonated with you, let us know by commenting, "I understood it."